In terms of writers that I admire, of course, Pixar storytellers, or Brad Bird and John Lasseter. The thing with John Lasseter too, which is really interesting, just to show you the power that he had as a storyteller. When Disney bought Pixar and John Lasseter became the head of animation, all the Disney animation movies have been successful. Like really great storytelling, starting with Bolt all the way to Tangled, Frozen, even the latest one, Zootopia. So these are not Pixar movies, but you can see the Pixar touch in them, and they've been successful with audiences. So kind of shows you that he's had quite an influence on Disney. So yeah, admire him. So hundreds and hundreds of writers.
Well, for you, let's say you were in, high school or something, college.
Right.
What were some screenplays that where you were like, I've just got to do something like this?
Right. Well, for me, it was mostly genre. So I've always my favorite genres I've always been a sci-fi person. So, and mostly specifically futuristic as opposed to sci-fi. I like to make that distinction. Futuristic is more like in the future, but on Earth, as opposed to Star Trek, Star Wars. Even though I love Star Wars, spaceships in space. I tend to gravitate more towards really thought-provoking stories like Blade Runner, The Matrix, Inception, anything that really has a really thought-provoking concept and story taking place on Earth in the future. Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind is a favorite of mine. Any thought-provoking movie I tend to like. Film noirs, futuristic, thrillers. I still remember the day I saw Silence of the Lambs. I saw an advanced screening of Silence of the Lambs, and it was the very first movie where I totally was not aware of anything else. Like, I remember the lights went down and you watched the movie, and the next thing I knew was the lights coming out. It's like, my God, 2 hours went by, and I was completely mesmerized from beginning to end every second. That's never happened before in a movie. That was the first time I remember being so taken and engaged by a movie.
What do you think it was, aside from
just great craftsmanship? Yeah, it's just amazing. Like everything about it. Interesting story, compelling characters, great relationships, fantastic twists and cleverness, and caring about not only the main character but caring about the villain. I mean, it's just great craftsmanship. I mean, kudos to Thomas Harris, who wrote the book, who's very close to the movie, and to Ted Talley, who wrote the screenplay, and Jonathan Demme, who directed. I mean, this was one of the very few movies that swept the top 5 Oscars. You have the best movie, best director, best screenplay, best actor, and best actress. There haven't been that many movies in the history of movies that got those 5. They're considered the pantheon of movies. So you have, like, I remember the very first one was It Happened One Night with Clark Gable and Claudette Colbert. That was another favorite of mine. I'm not sure I believe One Flew of the Cuckoo's Nest also was one of the top 5 awards, if I'm not mistaken. But Silence of the Lambs was the last one, I think. Yeah. I'll have to research that, but I remember. I mean, I knew that was an advanced screening, so it was before it opened, and I was like, oh my God! If anybody else has that same experience I've had, this movie is going to be great, classic, sweep the Oscars. I mean, everything. And I was rooting for that film. I remember watching the Oscars when that happened, and just being wow, yeah, one of my all-time favorites. And then Blade Runner is one of my top favorites. Although that didn't do as well when it opened, and it was actually considered a flop and only became a classic through word of mouth and just the sheer visual of the story. So.
That's an interesting concept when something doesn't show the numbers, but then there's this cult audience.
Oh yeah,
that
yeah.
loves it.
There's quite a few movies like that. Shawshank Redemption is another one that kind of flopped, box office, but then created, life of its own just from the sheer audience. It's like, wow, that they responded to it.
What is that about? That just
most I would think it's probably about concept. I mean, when you look at the concept for Shawshank Redemption, there's nothing appealing about it, right? I mean, okay, this is a movie about 2 people in prison. Okay, but when you experience it, and this is something too, a lesson for writers, is that just because you don't have a high concept. Now, if you're a beginning writer, high concept is paramount. It helps you because it helps you break in, because you will get, your script will be requested. And then once they get the script in front of them, and if it's well executed, then you're on your way in. But so I don't recommend having low concepts when you're a beginner. But in this case, I mean, it was Frank Darabont, it was Stephen King's novella. So, but it was a low concept. There was nothing about the concept that made it appealing. So it didn't really drive audiences to the theaters at the time. But the execution is masterful. And so that's what, once you're in there, once you're in the door and you experience it, then you go, my God. And then you tell others, and word of mouth, that's how it happens, you know. So that's the case with that.
Boy, that's a good question. What does it mean to develop a character? You know, I think you need to understand the character, understand the way the character thinks. Often we start out with, you know, when you're looking at it just from the nuts and bolts story, you go, okay, that's my villain, this is my hero, that's the love interest, and you come up with the archetypes. And then what we need to do is shade in those characters so that they're unlike any other hero, villain, love interest, you know, sidekick, whatever we've seen before. They're the individual. And so when we shade it in, that's the developing the character. We're taking a character and taking him from stick figure and shading them in so they're three-dimensional. Which, one of the things that I think is important is to know why your villain is right and why your hero is wrong, or protagonist and antagonist. Because often what happens is people don't know why their protagonist is wrong. Their protagonist is 100% right. Or why their antagonist is right, you know, is on the right track. And people are multidimensional, you know, we're not all good and bad. So to find the good in the bad character and the bad in the good character are critical to making that a three-dimensional character. And that's a tough thing for a lot of new writers, is they just want to have their hero wants to be, as a projection of themselves, they're the perfect version of themselves. But the problem is a perfect person is dull. We like flawed people. You know, we want, the example that I always use is Liar Liar, because Jim Carrey's character is a bad father and says so. And he is a terrible father. Now, he means to be a good father, but he's not. So that character flaw being the guy that, I mean, his biggest character flaw is he believes that a lie is better than the truth. So he lies to everybody so as to not hurt their feelings, and instead hurts their feelings twice as bad when they find out that it's a lie. But he is a character that's not 100% perfect. He's a bad father. And his journey from bad father to good father is what the story's about. And often what happens is new writers don't want to have that journey. They want to have the character be a good father all the way through because I'm a good person and this character is kind of part of me, and so they're going to be always good, and they don't want to explore the bad part of themselves. And we all have those. None of us are perfect people. We all are flawed. So you need to sort of dig into yourself often and find the bad parts of you and deal with those, you know, on screen. Did I already say you're basically you're taking the things you wouldn't tell your best friend and telling, you know, 100 million people worldwide. That's part of that. I think I said that before.
Do you think people can see that in themselves?
That's a tough thing. You need to be aware of who you are and really be introspective and look into yourself, and not, you know, there's a Hemingway quote that a good writer, oh man, what is it? Now I'm going to misquote Hemingway, but a good writer needs a built-in bullshit detector. And the bullshit isn't for other people. The bullshit is for you, because you are going to spout a whole bunch of bullshit as a writer, and you are going to give us the perfect version, and you are going to give us the I'm flawless version, and that's your bullshit. You need to cut out your bullshit and get to the reality, which is ugly, and we don't ever want to think about it, but we're flawed people, and those flaws are going to somehow come out on screen. One of the interesting things is our story choice always comes from whatever's inside of us. So I think it's interesting when, you know, I'm a high concept guy. I come up with a bunch of ideas, and every idea I come up with is me. And part of the job, once I come up with a high concept, is to trace it back and go, why is that me? And once I find why it's me, then I can explore that in the script better than just do the surface version. And I think bad high concept movies are just the surface, you know, what if he's an alien? What if he's whatever? And it's like, it's the surface story, not the internal story. And the internal story is what makes it human and what makes the audience relate to it. So I said about the reincarnated murder victim, 12-year-old girl, and that story is called Past Lives, and it deals with not being able to escape your past. And your past is that thing that's always a part of you. And I think all of us try to bury elements of our past. We go, oh, I did this stupid thing once. Oh, I made the mistake that ruined my life was telling this person they were an idiot, when in fact, if I had just kissed their ass, and all these things that we do, and there are baggage that we carry with us. That baggage that we carry with us is why we come up with ideas sometimes. We look through the filter of our lives and find the idea that interests us, and then come back. And if we just take the high concept version, murder victim is reincarnated and at 12 years old, the murder victim starts to bleed through. You could do the worst movie in the world with that, but what I decided to do is really look at how our past affects our present, and how sometimes things that we wish we could shake off from our past just hang on to us no matter what we do. The whole idea of revenge against the person that killed you is your past controlling you. So, once you come up with the high concept idea, then you backtrack it and go, how is this me? How is this my personal story? And how can I use that, the personal story, to make it the more emotional version of that story instead of the plastic Hollywood version, which it may become later on anyway.
Do you think that somebody under 35 would have a lot to pull from?
Yeah, sure. And some, again, I don't even know who the writer was, but some famous damn writer said, by the time you're 18, you've had enough heartbreaks and stuff happen to you that you can write a bunch of novels. and all it is by that when I was in kindergarten, and I desperately wanted to kiss Debbie Morrow, and she completely rejected me, real name. That's one of those things where, like, oh man, my heart was broken forever, and you go through that heartbreak. I was in kindergarten, I was 5 years old, and I've experienced heartbreak. So if you're 18 years old, if you're 15 years old, you have material to work on.
You do, okay.
You just have to be honest enough to mine that material.
Right.
Although I think, the older you get, the better screenwriter you are. Hollywood, are you listening?
Why do most people fail at screenwriting?
I think most people fail at screenwriting because it's the most difficult craft in the world. People talk about, oh, I want to be a director. Well, directing is a very difficult, challenging job, but it doesn't compare to writing. Craft of storytelling, most complex craft in the world, takes a lifetime commitment to master it. Now, a lot of writers either don't realize that it's going to take a lifetime of commitment, or they don't want to face a lifetime of commitment, because that's a lot of work, and that's a lot of time. Most writers are looking for the magic bullet, and which is why I talk about this in my class all the time. Most writers start off with this 3-act structure way of looking at storytelling, which was designed for beginners and does not work at the professional level. The reason it's so popular is because it is a kind of magic bullet. It says, oh, it's not that hard. Well, we'd all like to think that writing a successful screenplay can be done with a few simple steps. Paint by numbers approach. Unfortunately, it doesn't work. You have to be able to put in the work. And you have to also realize that the level of training, the type of training that's required to get to a level of excellence. And that means literally hundreds of craft techniques that have to be mastered. I will always tell writers in my class, plot is the most underestimated of all the major writing skills. Most writers know the importance of a good main character, they know what the importance of lean dialogue and so on. But when it comes to plot, they think, well, I'll just figure that out as I go. And of course that never happens, because it turns out that plot has more techniques that must be mastered to become a working professional than all of the other major writing skills combined. If you don't know what those techniques are, you have really no chance of working at that level. So that's why I say that it's so important to writers to get, not just get training, but to get the right kind of training so that they are working at the professional level. And what I think one of the key hallmarks of what I've tried to teach in all of my classes is that professional writers use fundamentally different techniques than all other writers. If you don't know what those professional techniques are, you cannot play in that game. You cannot compete at that level.
Do you think, too, a lot of people don't realize that their temperament is not suited? I mean, you're spending a lot of time alone. You're having to be sort of self-generating. And maybe people don't realize how difficult that is?
You're absolutely right. I consider the psychological element the biggest obstacle to writer success. Because the difficulty of what you just said, the difficulty of facing the page by yourself, being in that room alone, trying to meet that challenge day in and day out, is very difficult on the human mind. And writers, first of all, don't realize what it's going to take psychologically at first. And then when they get into it and they try to deal with that, they really don't have the tools or the support system to be able to be in it for the long haul. I often tell writers the people who work professionally are the people who are still standing. You know, everybody else they were knocked out because for various reasons they didn't get the right training, but most often it's they cannot handle the psychological difficulty of what it takes to write at the professional level, meaning writing alone, facing rejection again and again over many years and so on until you have mastered the craft at the level that somebody says, hey, you're a good writer, this is a good script, I'm going to hire you. So it's the people who A, commit to the craft, and B, who are still standing, who are there after many years, so that finally somebody says, yeah, you've done the work, you're actually pretty good. Because keep in mind, most people don't know a good story. They don't, they just know, I like it or I didn't like it. But they're not trained as writers. Again, it's the most complex craft in the world. So part of the difficult psychology is, how do you get over the fact that you're getting rejected from people who don't know what you do? That's very tough to face.
So which do you think is more important, stubbornness or a Teflon personality where rejection just doesn't define who you are?
I would say neither of those. I would say both of those are dependent upon a previous requirement, which is maintaining an openness to learning the craft. I will often get professional writers take my class. And when I talk to them, what I always find is these people have no ego, at least no ego that is coming across that I can see. Because they're professional writers. So you would think, well, they think I already know this stuff. But they don't. They don't take that attitude. Yes, they're extremely well trained. If they get to the level of a professional writer, they're extremely well trained. But these are people who are open to learning more. And I find that is the most important quality for being a successful writer. The willingness to learn from anywhere, anyone, so that your repertoire, your arsenal, your set of tools is constantly growing. That, in turn, gives you the confidence to say, that person didn't like my script, but I know that it is based on these craft elements that make for a good story. So whether they liked it or not, that doesn't affect me. I know it's a good story. That's where you get the foundation of confidence that you need to get through those tough psychological moments.
So almost as if an attorney or a doctor needs sort of mandatory continuing education, artists somehow think maybe they're immune to that, like I've already learned what I need to learn.
Most do, and it's a huge problem. You know, when I give classes, the most common question is all about how do I sell my script. Now there's an implication in that question, which is I already know how to write a good script. The only thing I'm not able to do is sell it. Not so. 99% of writers, you know, they will always talk in Hollywood about it. It's all about the connection. It's all about who you know. That's so overrated. 99% of writers, when they finally meet somebody who is a useful connection, they don't have the story tools to make that connection pay off. They don't have the craft foundation. So it's all about, you know, this ability to treat writing as a profession. And part of that is I can never know enough about how this craft works. And partly that's because every story is different. I talk to professional writer friends and we're always amazed. We think, okay, it's going to get easier now. It doesn't, it gets harder. Because the better you get, the higher you set the bar for yourself on your script. Cracking a story is always hard, no matter how much you know, because every story is totally unique. Yeah, there's certain elements that you can use, that you can hang your hat on, you can get a way into the story and so on, but every one is tough. So that's why this having this professional approach to being a writer, being a storyteller is so important. It's the only thing that A, makes you successful, but B, gets you through.